Hey, this is Drawn and Cornered with Chad. It is December 13th, 2021, and here's your news for the day. Build Back Better. It's still out there. We've been talking about it for months. The plan is nearing perhaps its final stages as Chuck Schumer has said that it will get through the Senate before they leave for the holiday recess, which is just in a couple of days over this course of this week. Joe Manchin still not on board. The CBO came forward with its ratings on this. The total cost, it was supposed to be 1.7 trillion. Turns out if you actually push through the programs for the full decade the way that everybody expects they will, even though they're sunset in the bill, it actually ends up being closer to about $3 trillion, sort of what everybody expected, sort of what we were initially at. And all of these sort of gimmicks and tricks that they used, as Joe Manchin mentioned, is how you get down to the 1.7, even though everybody knows our actual cost will be at least 3 trillion, if not more, over the course of that decade as all of these things kind of get parsed out. Still a lot of wrangling around the climate aspect of it, the SALT deductions, which is the state and local tax deductions that are included in there. State and local tax deductions, the SALT deductions, essentially allow high tax states to still operate in a completely, I would see, an unfair fashion. So right now, as it stands, without the SALT deductions included, without that capability of utilizing that mechanism, what happens is, let's say you make $100,000. You would be taxed by the federal government, by the state government on that $100,000, whatever that 12%, 7%, whatever your state is. So places like California, Illinois, New York, which have very high taxes, you'll be taxed on that full 100,000. Then when you move over to the federal government, if you have SALT deductions available, state and local tax deductions, what will happen is you will be taxed on the remaining amount that you have of that $100,000 after your state taxes are removed from it. So then the federal government will only be taxing you at, let's call it 88,000 or whatever. Right now, what happens is that federal government also taxes you on your full $100,000. So the SALT deductions allow cover for those high tax states because then your federal taxes are lower, and it essentially allows places like California, Illinois, and New York to tax exorbitantly high because they're given cover by the federal government, specifically by the Democrats in the federal government. It's a sham. It's a scam. It shouldn't happen, and hopefully that'll be something that the Republicans can push back hard enough against to not include it in there. But that's one of the issues that is still being talked about in the course of this bill. Whether or not this actually gets passed depends pretty heavily on Joe Manchin, which is why he's being called into the White House for Joe Biden to kind of twist his arm, negotiate with him, talk to him. Who knows? Joe Manchin has said pretty strongly that there are several things about this. He doesn't think that the 1.7 needs to be done. He certainly doesn't think it needs to be done now. He said, let's wait a little bit. The pandemic is kind of like falling away, so a lot of these programs are unnecessary, if not totally overwrought. He's talked about means testing for a lot of this stuff, and it's all been pushed aside. So hopefully Joe Manchin can stand strong enough to ensure that this doesn't happen prior to midterms, but we will see whether or not he falls in line with his party or not. We passed a fairly grim milestone over the course of the weekend with 800,000 total COVID deaths out there. Omicron is bustling along in several states out there. I want to say it's about a dozen states that have Omicron cases that are climbing. The death rates and the hospitalization rates are climbing as well. You'd expect that as everybody sort of moves indoors. The transmissibility and the chances of folks catching it, especially the unvaccinated, is just spiking. Everybody knew this was going to happen. It should have been expected. But for some reason, there's still a lot of hay to be made in making a big deal out of that, which is completely expected and completely understandable. Every disease that is transmissible by airborne disease, spikes when we all go inside for the winter. So it's seemingly reasonable to believe that COVID would do the exact same thing. Probably will do the exact same thing for its entire existence, which seemingly at this point is going to be endemic. It'll be here all the time. You will see this every year around the fall, the exact same way you see with colds, the flu, and the like. So there will be a lot of people talking about how increased measures need to be put forward, including vaccine mandates, masking mandates, and such, because of these spikes. However, there has been enough pushback against a lot of these vaccine mandates specifically that you're now seeing companies, organizations, and judges eliminating this possibility. There were several hospital systems over the weekend that came forward and said, hey, we're not requiring vaccine mandates for our workers anymore because we are operating at such short staff because of this. We are having so many problems with bringing people in and keeping people on board that we're just going to wipe that away. It's far better to have an unvaccinated nurse in the facility than it is to have this super hard line and losing nurses across the board and being understaffed. It's an unacceptable place to be, especially, and this is what I think is so mandatorily important to understand here. Last year, when we didn't have a vaccine and we asked these people to work in a pandemic without any protection, they were heroes. This year, when they choose to work in the exact same capacity, nothing has changed. They have not gotten any worse than they were last year. Now they're the rubes. Now they're the pariahs, and we want to ostracize them. That makes zero sense. The population at large, because of the vaccine, is far safer. So whether or not they vaccinate is inconsequential compared to last year, and yet they're being fired wholesale. So a lot of these organizations, a lot of these hospitals are pushing back against this. Again, the judges are saying that the vaccine mandate doesn't make sense. They put a stall on it. They put a hold on it. Seemingly, Joe Biden's vaccine mandate when it comes to OSHA is going to be having some heavy pressure pushback against it. A lot of companies are saying they just will not do it, regardless of whether or not it is deemed lawful. It's just not going to happen. There will be enough pressure pushback on this to make it impossible to move forward. The last news story you need to hear is everybody knows about the Texas law that came forward dealing with abortion, essentially saying that the state would not mandate any restrictions on abortion per se, but they would allow private citizens to sue abortion providers for anything that they do regarding an abortion for upwards of, I want to say it's $50,000, something like that. Sort of making the citizenry the police of this activity and hopefully working as a restriction on that by proxy with the citizenry. Gavin Newsome, out in California, the governor of California, has decided he's going to try and do the same thing when it comes to assault weapons and firearms, that essentially any private citizen would be allowed to sue a gun manufacturer that is making these weapons. Now, whether or not that is because those gun manufacturers' weapons are used to kill somebody, or if they're just being manufactured, is sort of unclear, which I would argue when you come to the abortion case, abortions end in death. Gun sales do not necessarily. I mean, every now and again, a gun is used. We've got something like 350 million firearms across the country, nowhere near that level of death by firearms in this country. So manufacture of a gun does not equal death by gun, whereas an abortion almost exclusively ends in death. So that doesn't seem necessarily like a parallel, but it is a political point to be made. Everybody is cheering Gavin Newsom for using this same type of citizenry police action to curtail that which they don't like lawfully. John Roberts has come forward and said he doesn't like these laws because it sort of ends around. It flanks the intent of abortion law. It flanks the intent, apparently, if this comes forward as well, of the gun laws and the gun rights that are out there. So we will see if this gets pushed further, if the Supreme Court eventually has to take this once you have an aggrieved party and the Supreme Court sees it, if they determine that these laws are not acceptable because they go against the spirit of what the Supreme Court has already decided in several of these different kinds of cases, whether that is abortion or gun rights. We will see whether or not they end up tackling that and fixing it. But for right now, you've got push from both sides towards these laws that seemingly can restrict some of the capabilities of these actions that people are unhappy with. That's everything you need for the day. If you like this sort of thing with a little bit of news, a little bit of analysis, just a bite-sized morsel to take into your day and have all the news that you need, definitely subscribe down below. Hit that bell so you get notifications every time we release a new video, which is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. We will see you on the weekends if anything big happens again. Thank you very much for watching. This is Chad with Drawn and Cornered, and I will see you again tomorrow.